Well. They never met someone like you. The world expected spectacle, loud entrances, grand gestures, the kind of performance that bends rooms to its will. But you arrived differently, as a quiet recalibration, a presence that altered conversations without demanding the stage. People felt you before they named you. Tones shifted, alliances rearranged themselves in the margins, and casual whispers carried the weight of strategy. You moved like a decision already executed, precise, patient, unavoidable. At first it is minor, a forwarded message, a screenshot, a private mention that looks accidental. Someone in a hallway passes a line of text like contraband. A small group forms, the kind of private channel that begins with curiosity and hardens into plan. They call it research. They pretend it is neutral. But what starts as curiosity often becomes a ledger of grievances. They tally moments, annotate clips, and invent contexts that make their discomfort feel like evidence. They believe compiling fragments is the same as understanding, and the mistake comforts them. The chat takes a shape, pinned messages, roles, a list of contacts to monitor. Moderators emerge who enjoy the sensation of order more than the pursuit of truth. Members post timelines with rhetorical confidence that masks a deeper panic. They believe if they can narrate you properly, they can control you. They forget that control through narrative is only as strong as the imagination of its authors. You watch this architecture of intent build itself in a private corner of the web. You do not counter every accusation because every reply is oxygen for them. When they shout, they breathe. When they strategize, they inflate their threat model. You conserve energy and let their limbs move while you study their center of gravity. The more they plot, the more they supply the exact elements a public needs to engage with. Each screenshot they highlight becomes a billboard, each rumor a prompt for curiosity. Their effort to bury you paradoxically directs traffic toward what they wish to hide. Observers, outsiders who do not care about the internal politics, begin to notice the pattern. People who follow the threads to see a hunt find instead a record of behavior. They discover habitual consistency, unexpected generosity, decisions made with craftsmanship rather than spectacle. The chat's evidence looks thin against lived action. Some new visitors arrive expecting a hunt and leave with questions about the hunters. A few members inside the group begin to feel the strain of performing certainty. They trade speculation for confidence because certainty is a warm coat in a cold social climate. But certainty paid for with projection starts to itch. Defections begin as quiet private messages to people named in threads. At first they are innocent, a question, a correction, an offer to compare notes. Those private exchanges reveal what curated public evidence never will: context, nuance, small acts of reliability. People who were once targets of gossip become interlocutors with clean memories and honest reactions. Some inside the server see this and hesitate. Hesitation is the first crack in collective performance. They label hesitators as compromised, or worse, as recruited. The label functions to reroute doubt into a narrative of betrayal rather than admission of error. This makes the group tighter for a moment and brittle for longer. Their tactics escalate. Whisper campaigns, soft offers to friends, attempts to buy loyalty or attention. Such maneuvers reveal more about the group's insecurity than about you. They assume that dividing networks collapses influence, but networks reconfigure around authenticity. You are not immune to observation. You are practiced at presence. You show up in ways that teach rather than preach. You answer obligations with actions, and your consistency is a slow engine that adjusts the conversation away from rumor. When the group expects a meltdown, you deliver a measured decision that reframes the context. You do not engage every provocation, because engagement is a transaction that often rewards the loudest bidder. Instead, you create the conditions where noise becomes irrelevant because it lacks purchase. People who once consumed the chat as a sport start to see low returns on manufactured drama. The chat's engagement metrics do not translate to influence outside its echo chamber. Beyond the server, the wider audience samples more material and finds a different pattern. Curiosity shifts to study rather than accusation. People who care about craft see method where the group sees manipulation. They begin to amplify examples of work, integrity, and quiet leadership. A surprising consequence: some who entered the chat aiming to damage you end up learning from you instead. They stay initially for the hunt and remain for the lesson. Conversion is not always dramatic. It is often a quiet recalibration of expectation. The server's announcements turn into footnotes that readers compare with direct experiences. Defectors who leave carry with them more than doubt. They carry testimony. Testimony spreads in small circles and then in public timelines. Your reputation solves the problem the chat tried to manufacture: attention. But attention now moves along axes you prefer: work, decisions, and people helped rather than spectacle. The group's intentionality snaps inward, and a new dynamic appears: infighting masquerading as correction. Moderators accuse each other of bias, and the language grows petty and procedural. They began denouncing nuance as compromise, and nuance pushed back into public spaces where it is harder to suppress. The server that once consolidated questions loses coherence because humans are not built to sustain constant certainty manufactured by fear. Meanwhile, those outside the drama notice the quieter evidence of influence: changes in behavior among people you worked with, improvements in projects, respect from unlikely quarters. Those signals are inconvenient for the chat's narrative. They attempt to discredit allies by dredging up irrelevant moments and framing them as patterns. They assume that cumulative irritation will overwhelm basic human judgment. But irritation without proof is a poor currency over time. Context wins patience. Patience reveals pattern of intent, not improvised reaction. Then something small happens. A moderator sends a direct message intended to bait and gets a reply that is human, precise, and disarming. The tone of that private exchange leaks back into the room, not as proof, but as a puzzle. Some members begin to read more broadly, compare sources, and see contradictions in their own archive. The chat cannot unsee its own faltering coherence. At a tipping point, an invite link sent to a new member reaches someone whose first instinct is craft rather than curiosity. They join expecting drama and stay because they find method. This new member posts a careful question that reframes a claim, and the reframing exposes how little the server's evidence actually proves. It is a small act, but small acts reroute narratives. From that point, the chat's performative energy begins to hemorrhage into debate about tactics rather than content. As their focus narrows, outside observers swoop in with comparisons, interviews, and counter-narratives. Those pieces point to patterns of reliability rather than spectacle. The very structure meant to dismantle you becomes a case study in how fear can manufacture leaders. You did not create that lesson, you lived it. In the quiet that follows the first shockwave, Your name circulates differently. People no longer gossip about you as a threat. They talk about you as an example. They discuss how you move, how you decide, and how you make hard tasks small through discipline. The chat's members watch this shift and try to double down, but doubling down is exhausting and visible. Exhaustion converts to sharp edges that cut credibility. In public, neutrality turns into curiosity, and that curiosity turns into new audiences sampling your work. And in the private corners, defectors begin to whisper not of recruitment, but of regret. Some send messages apologizing quietly for amplifying narrative without context. Those apologies are small, human signals that change the server faster than any public statement could. The final image of this part is simple and cinematic: a notification light on a stranger's phone, an invite link that was meant to trap finding instead a doorway to study, a private message beginning with a question rather than an accusation. That question reshapes a tone, and when tone changes, trajectories follow. The group that began as hunters ends the chapter smaller, its edges frayed, its energy diffused into the public it tried to command. You remain unbothered, not because there was no threat, but because you understood the rules of attention and used them without spectacle. The legend the chat tried to manufacture collapses under its own contradictions, and in the collapse, new observers find a map of how to move differently. And as a light blinks on another phone, new members arrive to learn rather than to destroy. What began as a small digital corner of malice has now mutated into a living organism of obsession. The server is no longer a secret room, it's an ecosystem. New channels appear overnight, each dedicated to dissecting your every move. Some study your tone, some analyze your timing. Others attempt to reverse engineer your choices, as if your mind were an open source code they can edit. What they don't understand is that your code isn't written in syntax. It's written in pattern recognition, psychological rhythm, and an instinct they can't teach. Every attempt to decode you becomes another mirror of their limitations. They're no longer planning your downfall, they're performing it on themselves. The server is swelling with members, students, critics, ex-allies, rivals, each convinced they're joining to expose you, not realizing they're joining to experience you. The chat's moderators have lost control. Their rules blur under the gravity of fascination. Threads meant to accuse now spiral into philosophical breakdowns about what kind of person you must be to cause this level of collective fixation. Screenshots circulate faster than they can delete them. Some servers get shut down for toxicity, only to respawn under new names, as if the internet itself refuses to let the story die. It's no longer a smear campaign. It's a study in cultural magnetism. Your digital footprint has become mythos disguised as data. They think they're archiving your downfall, but they're documenting their dependency. And the irony burns quietly. The very thing they built to destroy you has turned into the most effective marketing campaign in your name. You didn't buy attention. You provoked it through precision. You didn't manipulate anyone. You simply existed with such calibration that chaos mistook it for design. Now the watchers multiply. Journalists lurk under fake profiles. Sociologists take notes, and anonymous accounts cross-post your quotes out of context, only to find that context follows them anyway. Your words detach from origin and begin circulating as raw signal, no longer owned, no longer traceable, yet undeniably connected to you. What you've become is not a topic, it's a template. They measure themselves against how you operate. They compare their confidence to yours and find it wanting. They replay your pauses, your restraint, your refusal to react, and try to engineer that kind of control. The chat room transforms into a global classroom without syllabus or instructor, each member unknowingly reshaped by the very presence they intended to neutralize. And this is where things shift, when mockery turns into imitation. When the same people who once drafted takedown plans begin quoting you in arguments, using your style to win debates, adopting your frameworks for dominance, you've become the ghost in their lexicon, the silent mentor in their rivalries. They weaponized their envy into worship without realizing it. The discord they built to conspire now functions as a shrine. They discuss what you'd do in hypothetical situations, as if your mindset is an algorithm worth replicating. The moderators, once proud gatekeepers of defiance, now moderate belief systems inspired by the enemy they can't stop talking about. Their private chat rooms feel less like war rooms and more like sermons, where obsession preaches itself in circles. It's psychological recursion at scale. Every effort to contain your influence only amplifies it, because attention is alchemy, and you've mastered its conversion rate. Somewhere across the globe, new offshoots of this digital cult form. Reddit threads, Telegram groups, Discord clones, all orbiting the same gravitational core, you. They rename the channels after you, parody your voice, mimic your mannerisms, thinking they're mocking you. But the mimicry spreads your cadence like a virus. You've turned your detractors into your distributors. Their hate is now your publicist. You don't even need to log in. The algorithm does the rest. People searching for your downfall end up finding your philosophy. The very act of trying to debunk you becomes an initiation ritual into your logic. Their mockery boosts your metrics. Their obsession fuels your relevance. And what they can't tolerate most is the realization that you don't respond. Your absence has more weight than their campaigns. Your silence has more reach than their manifestos. They throw everything into the void expecting noise, but you weaponized stillness into dominance. That's when panic sets in. The group chat fragments into factions, each claiming they understand your motive better than the next. Some say you're manipulative genius. Others call you a social strategist. Others insist you're an idea, not a person. The arguments become theological. It's no longer about what you did. It's about what you represent. You're not just a person to them anymore. You're a theory, a concept, a new social equation they can't balance. The Discord server begins leaking screenshots to the public, hoping for sympathy, but the leaks only reveal pettiness, not persecution. Outsiders see the desperation behind the performance. The mob looks less like justice and more like projection. And with every exposure, the public recalibrates its judgment in your favor. What they intended as proof becomes documentation of hysteria. You remain untouched, because the more they talk, the more they testify. You turned their gossip into gospel. And somewhere inside that digital chaos, new players emerge. Not the haters, not the defenders, but observers, people who have no loyalty to you or them. They see the architecture of obsession and decide to study it. They map out conversation graphs, analyze timestamps, track language evolution, and the data they uncover horrifies them. Your name has become the most consistent keyword across dozens of servers, the most repeated term in threads about personal influence. You've become a sociological phenomenon, an involuntary experiment on how digital hate mutates into digital religion. Every data point proves the same thing. Resistance to your presence breeds more presence. The harder they try to erase you, the deeper you embed into the infrastructure of their attention. You are no longer an individual. You are an inevitable variable in every discussion about control, charisma, and consequence. People are forming career paths, analyzing the very aura they once mocked. You've crossed the line between personality and paradigm. And while they panic, you keep moving, quietly, methodically. You make decisions that ripple through industries, circles, communities. Each move is recorded by the very people who swore to erase you. They time-stamp your growth. They archive your achievements. They announce your wins under the disguise of critique. Your opposition has become your press team. Every paragraph they write against you only broadens your digital footprint. Their indignation is the echo chamber that sustains your reach. And deep down, even they feel it, the uncomfortable pull between hatred and respect. Because there's something intoxicating about someone who remains unbothered while the world plots in high definition. You've proven that control isn't about dominating others. It's about never letting them dictate your tempo. Now their own Discord channels mirror your psychological precision. They schedule discussions around you, hold debriefs on your responses, design infographics to track your moves. They've built entire workflows around someone who doesn't even acknowledge their existence. You've colonized their calendar. And yet the strangest evolution is how admiration seeps in. Some of the loudest voices start defending you mid-debate. They realize that in hating you, they learned you. They picked up your cadence, your patience, your restraint. They began using your tactics in their personal lives, and suddenly things started working for them. Their conversations improved. Their confidence returned. Their strategy sharpened. They don't like admitting it, but they owe their growth to the very presence they once demonized. Now their community is split into two halves: the purists who still cling to hate as identity, and the pragmatists who study your methods like sacred text. The purists rant louder, but the pragmatists grow smarter. And that growth terrifies the old guard because it means the narrative is slipping out of control. The energy once dedicated to tearing you down is now sustaining your legend. People outside the original circle start hearing about you not as controversy, but as a case study in composure. Your name trends under productivity, hashtags, leadership quotes, and self-improvement forums. Podcasts analyze how you handled digital warfare with grace. Think pieces describe your calm as strategic dominance. The irony reaches a poetic climax. The group chat that was supposed to destroy you has become a recruitment funnel for your philosophy. And you never said a word. That's the part that drives them insane. You didn't fight the smear campaign. You let entropy handle it. Because chaos always collapses when starved of opposition. You weaponized their hunger for relevance against them. Every time they screamed louder, the audience saw desperation. Every attempt to expose you revealed their obsession. Every accusation collapsed under the weight of repetition. You became the mirror reflecting their fragility back to them. Now the server's activity log reads like an obituary for self-control. The timestamps show 3 a.m. debates about you. Voice calls lasting hours, dissecting your motives. Threads filled with circular reasoning and emotional exhaustion. They've built a religion around your indifference, and still they can't stop. Because you're not just a story, they made you a symbol of the control they wish they had. and symbols don't die, they evolve. In the shadows of that digital hysteria, something unexpected happens. New communities start forming not to worship or attack, but to learn. Small private groups emerge dedicated to your principles of restraint, precision, and psychological clarity. They take your methods and apply them to business, art, leadership. You've transcended drama. You've become doctrine. And the original server? It's now imploding under its own contradictions. Members leave daily, citing burnout. Former moderators apologize publicly. The logs leak to the press. Headlines spin narratives of obsession. But by now, everyone knows the truth. It's not about you anymore. It's about what you revealed. The architecture of envy, the ecosystem of projection, the fragility of coordinated malice. You didn't just survive. You reverse-engineered digital warfare into a masterclass of psychological endurance. They realized too late that they were never plotting your downfall. They were documenting your rise. And as another day ends, the camera pans across screens, glowing in dark rooms, filled with threads about you, still updating in real time. Even in decline, the group chat refuses to die. It's feeding on its own echoes, a monument to misplaced energy. Somewhere, someone joins the server, scrolls through the history, and whispers what everyone now knows, but few will admit. They never met someone like you. You turned their coordination into your coronation. You transformed gossip into gravity. And as your name trends again, this time not through scandal, but through respect, the world finally sees what the chat could not. You were never the villain in their story. You were the author of theirs. Now the world prepares to witness the final stage, not the collapse of their narrative, but the ascension of yours into something no one can control, contain, or delete. You watch the ruin of their strategies like a careful observer watching an experiment conclude, seeing the predictable variables fall into place. First the anger, then the choreography of accusation, then the slow leaking of doubt that always follows a performance built on posture rather than proof. The servers that once pulsed with certainty now pulse with fatigue. Moderators trade harsh judgments for exhausted edits, and the language shifts from invective to explanation, as if confessing were easier than maintaining a lie. You do nothing dramatic. You do not deliver a final monologue. Instead, you continue to make the single discipline that always undoes: contrived chaos, consistent work. While their channels echo, your calendar fills with decisions that move projects forward, with quiet calls that solve problems, with precise actions that build credibility people can touch. People begin to measure you by outcomes rather than opinions, and in that simple arithmetic, their outrage loses mathematical weight. Outrage is a loud instrument that always needs an audience. Outcomes are a ledger that survives the noise. The chat's members find themselves in a strange position. They have created a library of their own mistakes. Screenshots and timestamps archived to prove your guilt instead prove their haste. Their evidence, circulated to justify fury, becomes a counter-evidence when contrasted with fulfilled promises and steady progress. Outsiders who stumble into the threads expecting spectacle find something else, a pattern of follow-through, a record of people who were helped, and a trail of small, consequential decisions. The conversion is slow and irregular, but it is real. Some inside the group pivot and become learners, embarrassed at first, then grateful for the accidental education. They begin stealing your phrases in private messages and applying your restraint in their work. Imitation is the most dangerous compliment. because it spreads beyond the original offender. Meanwhile, the more vengeful subset of the community double down, and their doubling down only fragments the audience further. The public is no longer forced to choose between two loud factions. It can choose calm evidence. This is your advantage. You don't need to win every argument because winning the argument rarely wins the future. Building the future does. Invitations arrive without fanfare. Podcast requests, collaboration emails, an industry figure reaching out with a question that requires no press release, only a conversation. People who once circulated private threads about your alleged crimes now ask you for feedback on projects. That turnaround is not a miracle. It is logistics. Work creates networks that outrage cannot sustain. Practicality always disarms performative fury. As these currents rearrange, a new set of consequences appears for the original hunters. Their reputations, purchased on fervor, become brittle under scrutiny. Employers and partners shy from the unpredictability of someone whose public life is governed by episodic drama. The very identity architecture they created, one where hostility is identity, starts to cost them opportunities. They feel betrayed by the market they thought would reward performative courage. And that realization is worse than defeat because it forces reflection. Some choose reflection, others double down. You are uninterested in their fate. You are focused on the emergent ecosystem of people who actually want to learn. Small groups form, not to gossip, but to study. They collect your speeches, your decisions, and the sequences that reveal how you move through complex social terrain without melting down. They parse your restraint as a method, and method scales. These offshoots become laboratories for people who want to convert attention into craft. They apply the lessons to startups, to nonprofits, to creative projects, and to leadership teams. The irony is clean. The very network assembled to fragment you becomes the seedbed for new collaborators who reproduce your behavior without crediting the origin, because the lesson is what matters now. You do not take credit publicly. You respond privately to a few messages with crisp advice, the kind that requires no ego to deliver. Those private replies catalyze bigger changes than headline fights ever could. A single thoughtful answer turns into a model that becomes replicable. Another person reads a conversation from the chat's archive and uses that failure as a warning sign to structure their team differently. Incremental improvements propagate. The cultural momentum shifts from spectacle to structure. The original discord, the theater of their hatred, shrinks into a case study in how envy amplifies itself when given a platform. Journalists write about the phenomenon with more curiosity than fury. Researchers diagram the contagion of obsession. People begin to say what no one allowed themselves to say before. They never met someone like you because few people move with such consistent economy of motion. You did not need to collapse them. You needed only to be a better example. That observation is a blow because it is simple and unanswerable. For those still invested in the hunt, the sting is personal. They created a mythology of your danger to comfort themselves. When that mythology unravels, they are left with the unglamorous fact that they misallocated their energy. The chat's logs are a public ledger of misplaced priorities. Some moderators attempt public reconciliation, and those moments are messy and human and oddly instructive. The apologies are not dramatic absolution, but small admissions. I wanted to belong. I wanted power. I was scared. The confessions humanize the architecture of attack more effectively. than any defense could. You do not grandstand upon their regret. You observe, you answer when asked, and you continue to perform the work that drew attention in the first place. The final act of this arc is not a takedown, but a quiet redistribution of attention. The people who learned convert energy into projects that matter. The people who clung to outrage lose momentum. The media attention that once fed the chat now follows productive threads, projects, initiatives, and ideas inspired by practice rather than performance. Your name continues to trend, but not as a subject of scandal. As an example people use when explaining how to move in public without being owned by public opinion. That is the victory no one in the chat anticipated, turning their campaign into a curriculum. You did not silence them. You simply made silence irrelevant by making utility louder. And in the end, when a new notification appears on your device, a message from someone who wants mentorship, you reply with the same measured clarity that started this entire reversal. That single exchange, offered without fanfare, ripples into 10 more, then 100. The chat rooms remain alive for a time, full of their old heat and new exhaustion, but they no longer set the terms. The narrative they tried to manufacture has become yours in a form they did not intend. A template for moderating influence, for converting attention into work, for taking the fragments of gossip and turning them into disciplined action. They will keep talking. Human beings always will. But the people who matter, the ones building, solving, and teaching, have already moved on and built around the foundation you silently laid.